Woo!
Welcome to Night Talks, the University of Florida College of Journalism and Communications talk show produced by students for you. I'm Kat Tran, a fourth-year student studying journalism, and our guest today is Caitlin Ostroff, a UF graduate who worked for the Independent Florida Alligator and the Miami Herald, and now she's a data reporter with the Wall Street Journal. Hi, Caitlin. Thank you so much for being here today.
Hey, Kat. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So Caitlin, you graduated from UF in 2018, studying journalism and political science. What sparked your interest in these fields, and how did you use that time on campus to build the skills that you use today?
Yeah, so I got interested in journalism from a young age, but just didn't know it was called journalism. I had my nose where it didn't belong. I used to eavesdrop on my parents, the whole 9 yards. There was warning signs all around. And I always really was interested in political news and used to read that religiously, even in between breaks between classes in high school. And so I thought when I entered the University of Florida that I wanted to be a political reporter, and so signed up for both journalism and political science and thought that that would be kind of my course through life.
I feel the exact same way. So now, Caitlin, you've had several notable internships while in college, starting with Gulfstream Media Group in 2015. What is this outlet, and what experience did you gain as an editorial intern there?
So that was a magazine internship that I did immediately after my freshman year. And that was much more culture, arts reporting. And I basically found that was not for me because I was just trying to get my foot in the door wherever I could. And I was like, let me try magazine journalism. I never have before. That journalism was wide and varied, and that wasn't something that was for me. And my personality was more suited to hard news, breaking news.
So during that time, you also began working as the staff writer for the Independent Florida Alligator around this time, followed by becoming the university editor. Tell us about your time at the Alligator and the types of stories you covered.
So I started off as a stringer, basically pitching stories without being on staff, and then later a campus reporter covering student government, then eventually university editor. That was largely because I did not have a car, and so it was easier to do reporting on the campus, but also I found that I really enjoyed it. Again, I thought at the time that I would be a political reporter, and so covering student government was sort of a natural segue. But I think it made me realize in part that, maybe political reporting, while really interesting to read, is not necessarily what I want to write about. And then I became university editor, overseeing not just student government reporter, but the university administration reporter and reporters covering goings-on on campus. And so that really taught me how to find stories, because when you are suddenly charged with filling a paper every day, and back in those days, the Alligator was a 5 days a week print publication. So we had a lot of stories that we had to churn out constantly. And so I got really good at just wandering campus and just finding things that had changed, different flyers that were posted, random things that had been put up by students for protests or awareness, and would send out these emails or messages to my staffers or contributing writers saying, hey, this is new or different, who wants to investigate this?
So in 2016, you also interned for the Herald Tribune Media Group. What were some of your key takeaways from that experience?
And so that was a general news reporting internship. I was volunteering for anything and everything that I possibly could, from covering Memorial Day celebrations to cops reporting to whatever else was happening. And so that was very much just raising my hand for everything. And I did some really interesting stories in the course of that, learned a lot about how to get different records from police reports, but also investigations from the Coast Guard and other official agencies for some stories that had happened over the course of the summer. That was also the summer that the Pulse nightclub massacre happened, and so I did a lot of reporting around that. And I think that was a weekend that happened. And it was just a matter of waking up and raising my hand and saying, what can I do to help without having been asked? And so I really, those were very heavy topics that I covered that summer, but I really enjoyed getting into breaking news and just getting to try my hand at a little bit of everything.
So Caitlin, tell me about what it was like covering a story so close to home.
Yeah, It was really hard because in the one sense you're human and you're horrified by the events that have happened. And then the other part of your brain is kind of going into journalism mode where it's we need to figure out what happened. We need to get information out there. And so it was my first time really interacting with a part of journalism that's frankly unpleasant to do. And having to kind of learn as I went how to do that kind of outreach in the nicest, most sensitive way that you possibly can, while also knowing that you're trying to race against all these other outlets and be considerate of the families. And so that was a really delicate balance. And then I think, in the wake of that, we covered a lot of memorial services in downtown Sarasota. We covered a lot of the kind of community aftermath for the LGBTQ plus community. And for me, that was, to some degree, it is going to hit close to home because I know people who are in the community, but also just being in the middle of it, you're human and you feel that pain. And so, figuring out that kind of decompartmentalization to the degree that you can of how do I still cover the story without kind of feeling like I am so impacted by the story that I lose that objectivity of being able to kind of step back and get the facts and just get that out there while still having enough of the emotion in there that it gets to the heart of the impact that this had.
Right. From that experience, how did you learn from a personal level, and how did you learn from that experience on the professional level?
I think on a professional level, it taught me how hard it is to respond to breaking news sometimes. Again, you're human. It's horrible. You feel active pain when doing this type of outreach to people and their families. But it also taught me the importance of it. There were stories that we wrote that, the community said, thank you for doing this. It's important to have our voices shared and amplified and to feel like we are making an impact and to know that we are. And so it really showed me the value of local journalism, of, doing the kind of grunt work that may not be glamorous, of running around in sneakers for 2 hours talking to 50 different people. But it really drilled home for me how important that was.
So now, from that experience, and now in 2017, you became a data investigations intern with CNN. What led you into that data-focused investigative side of reporting?
Yes, I had a speaker come into my political science class, and he did data work, but from a politics reporting lens. And so he was the one who kind of opened my eyes to the fact that you could use math and logic and programming in journalism, which really hadn't been a concept I had been introduced to before. So I found two professors at the University of Florida College of Journalism who were somewhat pioneers in that area of research, but also just started experimenting on my own and learning different programming languages and how I could apply those skills into stories that I was doing for the Alligator. And so very much it was, some guidance from two UF professors, but then a lot of experimentation to say, well, what can I do? Let me try this and see if it works, see if I fail, and what sticks to the wall.
Right. Now, Caitlin, what level of skill do you need to be a data journalist? Do you need to learn those necessary coding skills?
I mean, it depends. You can do data analysis in something as simple as Google Sheets or Excel. You don't need any sort of advanced degree or research or specialty skills. If you want to do things that are even harder to do, you're going to need a programming language just because, when you hit several 100,000 rows in Excel, Excel says there is no more space, please stop. And so it just winds up being a matter of what you're trying to do. But when I was first starting off, I did a lot of things in Excel. I did a lot of things in very kind of basic query languages. And then as I came up with more ambitious projects, it was a matter of, well, okay, now I need to learn this skill. I no longer have a way out, and, just forcing myself to learn it.
Right. What are some of the skills that you used in the beginning that you still use today?
I mean, I think basic reporting skills don't really change. So data journalism is not different from any other type of journalism that you're trying to find out what the story is. You're speaking to people in the community, experts. You're getting tips and ideas from talking to people and walking around. And so to a large degree, those basic principles do not change. And then within data journalism, a lot of it is just logic and interrogation of the data. No matter what type of programming language you're using or what type of analysis you're doing, you need to interrogate data the same way that you would interrogate information you're getting from a source. do you think it's accurate? Is there potentially another explanation for why this trend is happening? Is there information that I'm missing to try and get a better sense of what the landscape here is? And so the basic journalism questions that you wind up asking for any other story are still very much in play for data journalism.
Right, thank you so much for that. Now, Caitlin, right after interning with CNN, you then became an investigations intern with the Miami Herald media company. How was this internship different, and what were some of the most impactful stories you covered while there?
I was working on a couple of projects, but the most impactful was probably reporting that I did around the rehabilitation center at Hollywood Hills, which was a nursing home in South Florida, which I got sent to after Hurricane Irma hit. And so we had this big hurricane come through, a lot of people lost power, and within that, people lost power in nursing homes and assisted living facilities. And so when they lost power, it's Florida, it's hot outside. Because it's hot outside, it's hot inside. And so a lot of people died because there was rising heat levels and no relief from it. And so 12 people died there, and we did a lot of reporting on the emergency management plans that those sorts of facilities are required to submit to counties. And we wrote an initial story on the emergency plan for that specific nursing home and how bare bones it was. And then we went and requested records for the 3 surrounding counties. And so we wrote a story on, one, how hard it is to actually know what your grandmother or grandfather's emergency plan is for their facility. But also, even if you get it, we found that I think 1 in 4 plans was blank. So a lot of the plans were blank. A lot of them didn't contain basic information. Almost none of them made mention of how we're going to keep residents cool if needed. And so that was a very high impact story we did because it, along with other reporting people were doing at the time, did help get new laws passed to make sure that nursing homes and assisted living facilities have generators. That way, if they lose power, people don't overheat and die.
Right. So from your past experiences, do you feel like you were equipped and had the necessary skills to tackle such a difficult story?
Yeah, I think it was a learning experience still. I maybe kind of knew to some degree what I was doing at that point, but I got sent out there at 8 a.m. by my editor and didn't expect that I would be out there for 14 hours. And so I didn't pack food that I should have. I didn't really have water I should have. I certainly didn't have a chargeable, a portable battery to keep my phone charged. Shout out to local news stations for letting me charge it on theirs. There were certain things that I just was not prepared for. In the journalistic sense, I think I had a good idea of what I needed to do. Speak to people going in and out of the building, speak to people in the surrounding area. You just learn to be prepared, over-prepared, just in case, because you never really know if, a quick, hey, just go out there and see what's happening will turn into so by the way, you're the person who now knows it best. You've been out there the longest, and you're going to be out there all day and you'll cycle out tomorrow, but for this day, you are there.
So now, Caitlin, as previously mentioned by you, you continue to work for the Alligator as freelance editor and then as the online managing editor. How is your role with the paper evolving?
With the online managing editor roles, that was more of let me see what I can do for story presentation, let me see what innovative forms I can think of for storytelling. And that was much, to some degree it was get these stories up online, the daily grind that we've always had, but also, if we're going to do a special package, what code can I write to make it look amazing? What other formats can we do for audio, video, photo? How do we package that with a story? What type of mapping can we include? And so it was more kind of thinking of bigger projects and bigger picture packages that we could do with stories to kind of give it an extra bit of boost in elevation and make it look better, not just for the student newspaper itself, but also, these are student journalists trying to get internships, and all of these little things help elevate the profile of everyone at the paper.
So now, your final internship in your undergraduate career was with the Wall Street Journal as a weekend business and finance intern. What experience did you hope to gain in this 4th internship?
I wanted to have experience at a national newspaper. I had done a lot of local and state reporting up through then. That wound up being a really great summer because I sort of walked around the newsroom and went, hi, I'm Caitlin. I know a bunch of weird things about data and programming, and how can I help you? And I met a lot of really great reporters who became mentors who said, well, if you want to like parse this data, like we would absolutely love to do this story. And so I got into a lot of really interesting pieces, not necessarily because I had a great understanding of business or finance, because I didn't, but because I had other skills that complemented what other reporters were doing well, and got to kind of JV on some stories that maybe I wouldn't have otherwise.
Did you feel like the data tools and methods used there, was that something that you had to learn and adapt to, or was it something that you felt was an easy transition to get used to?
I think by and large, like there was no prescribed, you should use this language, you should use that language. I think for data journalism, especially in the Wall Street Journal, but I think it's true of other newsrooms as well, if the thing gets done, if it gets done correctly, that's kind of the only real marker for success. And yeah, you maybe want someone else reviewing your code to make sure that you didn't mess anything up. But, you know, if I was more comfortable programming in one language, they weren't then going to be like, well, you need to do it in this one. It's more about, here are the skills you have, can you apply them to get the thing done?
Caitlin, now tell me about some of the key takeaways you have from reporting on the national level versus reporting on the local or state level.
National stories are much harder because like the country is extremely fragmented. So if you're trying to get data from all 50 states, you need to find something like either slightly easier to do or be prepared to devote many months to trying to do that. And it's just a different way of conceiving of stories. You're thinking of what are broad trends that apply everywhere, rather than what are small changes that I see by walking around my community. And so for me, even still, coming up with national story ideas is intrinsically harder than it would be to come up with ideas for Gainesville or the state of Florida or South Florida, just because you're dealing with such a more diverse and varied group of people that don't necessarily have a commonality other than the fact that they all live in the US.
After graduating from the University of Florida, you became a data reporter for the Miami Herald. Did your internship prior help open this door? And how's that transition from a student to a full-time reporter?
Yeah, so I had interned previously, as you mentioned, and because of that, I knew a lot of people on staff, and I knew the managing editor who was doing hiring for that position. And so I saw the job posted right before I graduated, and I knew I wanted to apply for it. And I reached out to him, and I was like, hey, just to let you know, I plan on applying for this. I'm going to be in South Florida in the week before I started the Wall Street Journal. If you want to meet up, like I would love to fill you in on things I've been doing. Otherwise, I'm happy to answer any questions. And I think because, it's journalism, for better or worse, is often an industry where it does help to know people. And I don't come from a legacy journalism background, but because people know you and they know your work ethic and they know your work caliber. And so I wound up getting hired as a data reporter, and the transition, like this is terrible for how much we used to work at the Alligator. I found it so much easier than like being a student and reporting for the Alligator at the same time. I was like, I have evenings free. I'm not working till 2:30 a.m. each morning. What is this? It was great.
Now, were there any challenges you had to overcome in this full-time position?
I think that I was the only data savvy person in the newsroom at that time. And so for me, that was, one of the challenges of how do you keep your skills sharp while not necessarily having others in the newsroom to go to for guidance. When I was a student at UF, there was, a couple other students doing similar data skills. And so I could go to them and be like, hey, did you understand this thing? Like, I'm struggling here. When you're kind of the solo person in a newsroom, it becomes much harder to do that. But I wound up finding support through others in the industry. The data journalism community is super open. They love helping out younger reporters. They're happy to share knowledge and experience. I needed to know that like the Slack existed, but I had gone to conferences as a student, and I had reached out to other data journalists, and everyone was super happy to tell me, here's where resources are if you need them. And so it wasn't difficult at all to do that outreach or convince people to, kind of share the load with me. And honestly, like it was almost an economical pitch too, because it benefited all the newsrooms. And so I think because journalism's gotten so much smaller, it's less competitive in some sense. And it's more of a, well, if we can find people to tag team and share some of the load, we look better for our readers locally than if we just didn't have that information.
Caitlin, you had experience reporting on the local, state, and national level. Now, in 2019, you then became a markets reporter in London for the Wall Street Journal. Did reporting in the United Kingdom present any issues?
Yeah, it's completely different. Everything from language that in American English means one thing to it meaning something else in UK English. Like to table a bill in the UK does not mean to like set it down, it means to introduce it. Scheme in the UK does not mean someone sitting there conniving and planning bad things. It just means a government program. And so there were language differentials to figure out. The protections for media and reporting in the UK are very different from how they are in the United States. And so there was a lot of things that were just different that I had to figure out from a cultural perspective. And then also I was covering a beat that I had never really covered before. And so it was getting used to a lot of weird jargon that meant nothing to me. And I wasn't quite sure how it meant anything to anyone else. And just having to kind of sit there and hear that vocabulary over and over and ask really dumb questions until eventually it became clear as to, oh, this is what someone means by this thing. And I still ask dumb questions every day. Like it comes with the job and the territory. And so you just sit there and you think, oh my God, like everyone knows this. Everyone's so much smarter than I am. Why can't I figure out this secret language? And you just eventually have to go through the motions enough that eventually it starts to make sense. And it's like that every time you change a beat or you change location, and you just adapt and you get not 100% comfortable, because I don't think anyone's ever comfortable raising their hand in front of the class and being like, I don't understand this thing, but you get more comfortable with it. And ultimately, when you're writing stories about different topics, your obligation is to your reader to be able to understand it. So if I don't understand it, no one else is going to either.
In 2023, adapting into a new role as a finance reporter for the Wall Street Journal, followed by data reporter in 2024, how did the focus of your reporting change in these roles?
My focus has been on crypto for much of the last 4 years. Even in the newest job title, that's still much of my focus, but also expanding back out to broader finance and other topics we might be interested in within that. You know, I'm still really interested in the finance reporting topics. I still have all of this knowledge and information on the crypto industry, and just because my title changes doesn't necessarily mean that my work is going to shift that much in the public eye.
So Caitlin, how do you balance these technical data skills with storytelling to produce effective articles and pieces?
Yeah, I mean, the best data stories are ones that you don't know that they are data stories. It should read like a story where you're seeing the biggest finding, and that's the biggest surprise to the reader. And then after that, you're talking about people impacted. You're talking about how we got here, what laws allowed for that. And so it's a matter of, you know, you do a lot of data work to get a data story, but you don't always want that to be apparent in the end result. And so you're thinking, what visuals best communicate this in the most easily understandable way?
Right. So Caitlin, can you walk us through and describe a typical day in the life as a data journalist? How many stories are you actually researching at a time?
Because I'm me and I'm insane, I will usually have like 6 different stories that are in some degree of completion. Sometimes you get stories that wind up being a very quick turn. Sometimes you get ones that take a lot more effort. I don't really have a typical day, which honestly I love because it keeps things interesting. And like the other week I was going to cover a protest that the crypto community was doing, and it had nothing to do with data journalism. It was just, you know, some interesting people will be there. I'm gonna write this really quick, short story just because I think it's newsworthy and it has nothing to do with my data skills at all.
From your cryptocurrency storytelling pieces, what were some of the key takeaways?
Yeah, so it's a huge sprawling industry with a bunch of different companies and a bunch of different actors. We tend to focus on the largest companies that have shaped the industry. Some of those wind up being these big exchanges where you can buy and sell different cryptocurrencies. So I've done a lot of coverage of a company called Binance. I've done a lot of coverage of a company called FTX, which collapsed in late 2022, and some other, you know, big crypto firms. And so a lot of the focus has been on what is the entry point for the average person into crypto. And so that's kind of been how I've viewed my beat and what I focus on. And from within that have done stories on everything from new products being offered to scams that have unfolded to outright frauds that have been uncovered.
What are some of the challenges you found in these cryptocurrency stories?
Trying to figure out what's real and what's not. You get a lot of new crypto projects that pop up very quickly. And so a lot of the considerations are, what is the history of this thing? Do I know who created it? Do I know enough about this project or this company that I think that we should be writing about it? And so if a company is advertising in airports, if they're advertising on taxi cabs, if they are marketing to US persons, then I will sit there and be like, okay, maybe this is worth covering, rather than if it's some small company that's only advertising to a handful of people.
Caitlin, what advice do you have for anyone that would like to get into the data journalism field or just journalism in general?
Reach out to people who you think are doing interesting work. Ask them how they got there. People are generally happy to help students. Ask any questions that you can. Try everything. It'll teach you what you like, what you don't like. With data especially, the community is so open. There's a conference called NICAR where everyone gathers, but even outside of that, there's the Slack, there's all of these resources. So find someone doing work that you would one day want to do and pepper them with a million questions, because the Lord knows I did. And they will be the ones who teach you, here's how I got here, here's some resources, here are some internships you may not have considered. And always ask the question, because if you don't, the answer is always no. My internship at CNN I got because they didn't have a data internship, and I asked them if they would make one, and they did. So if you don't ask the question, the answer is always no. And so you guys are students, you have so much leeway to do so many things and no repercussions for it. So ask people questions, show up for events, try your hand at every different form of storytelling.
Thank you for your insight, Caitlin. As a journalism major myself, I've always felt like I've never been able to tackle data. But with you being here with us today, you've really walked us through your footsteps and your experiences. And I'd like to thank you, our viewers, for joining us. So until next time, good night.